Myles Berman is coming on right now to talk about all the DUI checkpoints and DUI enforcement patrolling over the holidays. If you need his number, I suggest you write it down right now, even if you don't need it, because you might. 1-888, the number 4, TOPGUN, 1-888, the number 4, Top Gun. Let's get him in here, Myles Berman.
Myles!
You handsome dog.
Handsome as ever. I mean...
You haven't aged in 20 years.
It is
I think
weird.
he's a warlock. This man is not aged.
We've known him for, 18 at least.
Yeah.
Crazy.
In L.A.
That's right. 18 years. Crazy.
So, Myles, I was watching the news last night. There was a big press conference warning people about smoking weed this holiday season. Now that it's recreational and it's...
Hi, Frank.
Hey, Myles! And they were saying, don't do it. Don't be smoking weed and driving, because we're going to be training our officers to be able to recognize people who are high. And so is there a super sensitivity right now for the marijuana driver, being that it just became recreational?
Yes, there is. This has been going on for quite some time, but it's really becoming more pronounced with the a lot of people just smoking pot. I mean, it's just a fact of life now because it's become legal, both for...
but there's no test, right? I mean, it's not like the alcohol test where there's a breathalyzer or the field test. I mean, what do they do for marijuana?
Well, blood. They do a blood test. But the field sobriety tests are similar, and they do the same kind of things and the same type of investigation, and they end up doing a blood draw. Sometimes it's pretty easy for the officer to... form the opinion that probable cause to continue to investigate when they pull somebody over and the window's open and the officer's starting
I'm sitting there with nutter butter all over my face going, there's a problem.
I don't understand why people smoke pot in their car and then drive. I mean, that's just like having a sign saying, pull me over, pull me over. But it happens. And the investigations take on just the same type of import. But what's interesting is that for alcohol, they take your license. But for DUI drugs, including marijuana, they don't take your license on the street. So here's what's happening. But there's a procedure called the reexamination, and so which is even much more severe than if they just take your license and there's an administrative hearing for DUI alcohol with the DMV. Here, they actually do a full-blown investigation. The DMV calls you in. They sometimes want a medical examination, a psychological examination, an eye examination to determine whether or not you should even continue to drive. So the police, for DUI marijuana, we're seeing more of this new procedure for DUI alcohol, DUI drugs, which is this re-exam, could be a nightmare.
When they pull you over because you've done some sloppy driving or something, they've got a reason for pulling you over, and you are high on marijuana. The blood draw, is it done there roadside, or can you say, no, I'm not doing this? And is the blood draw done like half an hour later at the station? And by that time, isn't it possible the drugs have worn off?
Marijuana stays in your system for quite some time.
Like 30 days or something, I heard.
Yeah, I mean, it could be days, weeks. Yeah. There's no real set carved in stone how long it stays in your system. Everybody's different and unique. And depending on how much you smoke. And there's different variations of marijuana as well.
Well, Frank smokes so much it's in his kid's system.
Well, let's say you smoked 3 days ago then, but you weren't high then. You were reaching for the radio knob or something, and you weaved. They pull you over, but the marijuana cigarette you had was 3 or 4 days ago.
Oh, that's
cigarette. That's funny.
The marijuana joint, the Mary Jane that you puffed the magic right. Let's say that was last week, but it's still in your system and it shows up. So isn't that kind of a problem?
Yes, it could be. And it's difficult for them to prove DUI marijuana cases. I mean, that's just the long and short of it. But, people have to go through the process. And the consequences for DUI marijuana criminally is the same as DUI alcohol. I mean, the sentences are the same.
But it's a lot harder to prove, like you said. So, I mean, a marijuana case makes your job being a defense attorney easier because the burden of proof is on the prosecution, not so much you, right?
Well, yes, it's easier to the extent that we know going in that it's very difficult for them to prove.
But Myles, I think
we have to go through the motions.
You have to go through it, but I think too with alcohol, There's no, contrary to popular belief, there's no medicinal purpose. I can't be like, oh, I've got to have my Chardonnay because I got anxiety. But with marijuana, you can have legit horrible back pain that you don't want to take oxycodone for something. So it's like, oh, I smoke a little before I go to work because otherwise I can't go to work. And then you get pulled over. It's like, and I'm not high, like Frosty said with the knob on the thing. I'm not high. I have back pain. So then what's that? Because you have to go and live your life and go to work. Yes, I smoked this morning, but because I have back pain.
That's a great point. A lot of people think because they have a medical marijuana card that it somehow would preclude them from being arrested and prosecuted for DUI marijuana. That's absolutely not the case. It does not protect you from prosecution. And you think about it logically, if you're taking any other type of prescription drug, you're still not supposed to be able to drive if it's impairing you. Well, it's the same thing with marijuana. But again, marijuana is much more difficult to prove because of the length of time it stays in your system. It's just a fact of life.
So with booze, there may be a gray area. Well, what is it? 0.08 is against the law.
Correct.
But they could still nail you with a 0.06 if you're driving poorly.
Correct.
Or even a 0.04 or 5. But in marijuana, there's no gray area, right? It's either in your blood or it isn't.
Correct. There is no. Well, actually, it's all gray area.
Maybe it's a bigger gray area.
You almost got me there on that, Frosty.
I rest my case.
Yeah, no, you're serious.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
You're crystal clear today.
It's a green area.
It's always a gray area. Yeah, a green area too. It's always a gray area.
Yeah, that's right.
It's difficult. Whatever they had in their system, that's not enough. And however, whatever they discover, it's been there for quite some time and it's not impaired.
If I had a vape pen, say, in my car,
Or pocket.
but it's available to
or
me.
over there.
Yeah, it's available to me. Is it almost like, is there an open container? Like I know when I transport alcohol, I guess it has to be sealed. I can have it in the back seat, or as long as the six-pack's not open and one's missing.
Right.
But if I have the ability just to take it, grab it, and puff on it without lighting it like a cigarette, is that considered an open container in the car for marijuana? Like it's, the accessibility raises question of whether I smoked it or not, or I'm just transporting it and planning on smoking it when I get home.
Well, if there's anybody in the legislature listening to your show now, it may become just like an open container. But
Well, great! I just ruined it for everyone.
Damn it, dummy.
Damn.
Yeah, no. This is all kind of new stuff, and there's no. I don't know of any prohibition to having a vape in in your car.
On your person.
Yeah.
We're talking to Myles Berman, Top Gun DUI defense attorney. Here's the back to booze question. Let's say I had 1 or 2 drinks. I mean, I really just had a couple margaritas for lunch. I didn't binge. I didn't
it's not hard for me to imagine that.
It's an any
Jessica
given day.
Simpson skinny
Any
margie?
given afternoon. So let's say I really just had a couple beers or a couple drinks, okay, and I got behind the wheel. For whatever reason, I'm pulled over. Now, the cop asks, the police officer asks me, have you been drinking? Now, I know if I tell the truth like I'm supposed to, yes, officer, I had a couple beers, I could be in big trouble. But if the 2 beers I had was an hour ago, and I'm pretty sure I'm not over the limit, should I lie and say no?
Well, here's what I actually say. This is my best answer. When you're pulled over for DUI, alcohol, or drugs, it doesn't matter. You don't have to answer the officer's questions. You don't have to subject yourself to being interrogated. It's all voluntary. What you do have to do is identify yourself. You have to show your driver's license, a proof of insurance, and vehicle registration. So what you're trying to do is walk yourself through a process where you minimize your chance of being arrested, prosecuted, and convicted. And the best way to do that, in my judgment, is stand on your rights, and that is that you don't have to answer it.
Give them the 3 pieces of information.
Correct.
And that
So
is
when
it.
the officer says, well, let me ask you again, sir, have you been drinking? What do I say?
Well, you want to be nice and polite, obviously. You say, officer, I appreciate what you're doing, but I prefer not to answer that question.
I'd say, have you been drinking?
You answer, then I will.
Would you like some?
By the way, it's the same thing with field sobriety tests. They're all completely voluntary. You don't have to do them unless you're under 21. Then you have to take a portable breath test. So, most people don't know these things. And when you're in that situation, it's a surreal experience. Everything is kind
You're
of
nervous.
slow motion, right? Especially since most people have never been through this before.
Right.
And they don't necessarily realize that they don't have to give this information.
The eye thing, the stigmas or stagmus or stigmata or whatever it is, what is that?
Horizontal. I don't know what you're talking about.
The shaky eye. No, you don't. 'Cause
I know there's
think I have it.
horizontal gaze nystagmus. That's what that is. That's for the
Horizontal gaze. Those are my favorite gaze. just lay them out. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
maybe something different.
So when the police officers follow my finger, please word this in legalese, because I know that I could possibly say, well, I have an eye condition where my eyes normally twitch, so I can't follow the finger. Like, it looks like I'm drunk, but I'm not. What's my
There's
offense there?
a small percentage of the population that has nystagmus in it, but basically that's where the officer will move an object left to right in front of your face, in front of your nose, maybe 10 to 12 inches or so, 6 to 12, depending on how they're trained, and they look for the bouncing of the eyes when they're.
Okay, so if you're
way to
drunk,
the
your
left,
eyes
way to
bounce.
the-
If you're sober, you're just watching the pen.
It's when they start bouncing,
Got
and
it.
they try and calculate what your alcohol level is based on that, which is very, very difficult and somewhat unscientific.
Some of us have bouncy eyes anyway. I think mine bounce anyway.
So
I
as
really
far
do.
as the officers being trained, like I said in this press conference last night, they're talking about marijuana and holidays and drinking or smoking and driving. Obviously, there's things to look for with the eye thing for drinkers, or being able to walk heel toe without falling over. Is there an established test for marijuana? I mean, walking heel to toe. I mean, I don't really think that affects people. Maybe it affects everybody differently, but is there a different test? Like someone in 949 says at DUI checkpoints now, they will, obviously just look at you and see if they can't get the smell of alcohol coming out of the car. Because if the smell of alcohol is coming out of the car, probably you've been drinking and it's coming off your breath, because that's how you metabolize alcohol, through sweat and through breath.
Right.
And so they could smell it possibly. But they say that now that they're doing something called a Cheeto test, to where basically the officer has a bag of Cheetos and offers you a Cheeto. And if you say yes, it's 90% chance you're high. Is that true?
Oh, God.
I thought you were going to talk
Really
about.
fell for it.
Oh, I had Myles hook, line, and sinker with the Cheeto test. He's like, I haven't heard of this thing yet. I check your fingers for orange stains.
I thought you were going to say the Wow Man test.
Oh, the wild.
Wow Man.
There's 90% chance you're high, so you're getting arrested. But
Miles, I've seen some consumer breathalyzer machines advertised for the holidays. How accurate
the
are those?
keychains, I saw that.
Those
yeah.
things that you breathe. How accurate are those compared to the real machines that cops have?
None of them are totally accurate.
Even the
real
cops,
machines.
right?
Are
Yeah.
they close? Are they reliable enough to where if I should maybe rely on it if I'm leaving a bar and puffing my keychain machine? Is it a good indicator of whether or not I should drive?
That's a tough question to answer. But if somebody has one of those portable breath test keychain and it indicates that you're a .20, yeah, that's probably a good indication you should be driving.
.20, yeah.
Grab an Uber. It's
No, I
fairly
saw one of
inexpensive.
those the other day, Frosty. I don't know those. I can't remember what it was. Maybe Costco. They had those on a rack someplace, and I looked at the fine print. It says maybe be within .02 of accuracy. So when you think if it's .08 is legal, then .06 you might be .08, but you could. I mean, so it's like it's so close in being impaired at all that the .02 is a pretty big margin.
Yeah,
That's
right,
where I
right,
need the
right,
help.
right.
I understand if I've had 18 beers, I'm wasted. But if I've had 2 or maybe 3, possibly 4 over 2 hours, I don't know if I'm over the limit. That's why I would
'Cause you
think
don't
that
feel
machine
like you
would
are.
tell
Here,
me.
this brings it to another issue. Breath testing is, in my judgment, an unreliable device. They call it an instrument, but it's a machine. And so one of the reasons why we're able to beat these cases is because of the science involved that makes breath testing unreliable. So even the machines that the police use, oftentimes they'll have results that are a .10 and a .12, and that's good enough.
When they're in here, I know that when we're doing the drinking shows, we
Right.
have to stop drinking for 15 minutes before you're
Right.
tested again.
Right.
Now, let's say I leave the bar and I'm like, oh, I have had 2 beers or 2 glasses of wine. I'm like, oh, let me swig with some Listerine.
Right.
Now
Which
that's
contains alcohol.
Now that's fresh on my breath, and I get
Right.
pulled over, and it's like, oh, that's going to be way higher than it is because I've got Listerine on my breath.
Right.
So you're right. It's not reliable at all, really.
You'd be great for one of our juries.
Anytime you need me,
Heidi.
Miles,
He's like, I'll
I
select her as jury member number 3.
That's right.
And the machines the police use, do they not calibrate those after?
They do. They calibrate them. They constantly make sure that they're in proper working order according to the protocols and standards that
But it's the same
government
nozzle
uses.
for everybody. They just wipe it on their jeans. I'm kidding. It's not true. They have new ones, I guess, for everything.
Just shake it out.
It's a spit valve. Get that out of there. And they measure your spit valve. Myles L. Berman, it's always fun having you on the show. Obviously, we don't want anyone to drink and drive or smoke and drive this holiday season because it can be very, very, very expensive. You could lose your reputation, lose your job, lose your family, pretty much lose everything and license. And you don't want to be in that situation. But if you do find yourself in a situation where you need help, Myles L. Berman is the guy to call. 1-888, the number 4, TOPGUN. Be sure and check out the website too, topgundui.com. And be sure and follow him on Twitter at Myles L. Berman. And he posts where I guess it's public knowledge where the DUI checkpoints are going to be. And
Myles with a Y, by the way.
He always posts that for you. But thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you, and happy holidays to everybody.
You
Safe
too.
and sober.
Get a
Christmas and New
designated
Year's. And Frank, I'm glad to see you back.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much, Myles. It's good to be back. But right now, I guess we do have to apologize, pass the ball to Marcy, to those of you that we have offended. What's going on?
Sorry
Apologize.
to
What's
please.
going on with your apologies?
Sorry to police officers, unicorn planets, jacked kangaroos, and blow-up sheep owners.
Listener Michelle, Planned Parenthood, people with wet jeans and depressed winos.
Base jumpers, jockeys, Russians, and drunk Canadians.
Rock climbers, Denver Broncos, Al Pacino, and Harry Potter.
Kathy Lee Gifford, Wayne's World, Catholics, and Monica Lewinsky.
Blind wives, marine biologists, Asian sons, and women with cankles.
Albertsons, Jimmy Dean Sausage, Taco Bell, and Time Magazine.
Heather McDonald, deal or no deal models, all Heathers everywhere, and horizontal gaze.
Myles L. Berman, Prince, Tara Reid, and Eric's wife. You really have to listen to the whole show, brought to you by your Southern California Toyota dealers. We are Frosty, Heidi, and Frank.